Pop quiz hotshot. Is this a map of racial covenants in Minneapolis or a map of who voted for Omar Fateh and who voted for Jake Frey in Minneapolis? I'll give you a second with that. It's a map of racial covenants in Minneapolis. Now, this over here is a map of who voted for Omar Fateh and who voted for Jake Frey. You'll see similarities between the two with the exception of the north side in this northwest region here. We'll explain that in just a second. Now, the first thing that you notice is where racial covenants were very present that dictated where black people and people of color could or could not live. This is where Jake got most of his votes. Now, you see in those red dots areas in southwest Minneapolis. Now, Omar got most of his votes where people of color were legally allowed to live. Side note, there are still houses with racial covenants written into the language of the contracts for the homes. I spoke to a friend recently who literally had to address that in buying a house about 10 years ago. Now, an outsider would ask, why is this so segregated? I thought that Minnesota and Minneapolis were blue all the way through. This is because of the Minnesota paradox, which at its core is Minneapolis. Many communities, predominantly white, take part in deeply rooted racist practices. However, outwardly present that they are welcoming when in fact they are not. It's a great example of this in a book. I think it's called A Good Time for the Truth. There's a story of the first black man who moved to Kenwood neighborhood where he was met by all of the white residents and they gave him personal letters, kindly or not so kindly, asking him to leave the neighborhood. Back to the election, you'll see where it's light red is where Omar won by a thin margin, where it's light blue, Jake won by a thin margin. The darker the color, the larger the margin. Now, let's get to the north side of Minneapolis, predominantly black neighborhood. Jake won by mostly thin margins, however, some large. This is because the majority of voters in the north side voted for Jake. However, the majority of the north side did not vote. This means whoever is running against Jake, or whoever ran against Jake, did not do a great job of getting people out to vote or garnering their interest in even being invested in the mayoral election. It's important, it's very important to point out that Jake oversaw Derek Chauvin before Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. Jake oversaw the promotion of Mark Hanneman, the cop who killed Amir Locke, and only eliminated that promotion when it became public. And Jake is also in the pocket of so many developers. He is the human embodiment of presenting as welcoming, but deeply rooted in racist practices. We see this time and time again as Minneapolis, as well as Minnesota, ranks amongst the top states and cities in the country for racial disparity in education, employment, and law enforcement. If people want this to change, they would have to not only get people out to vote, but they would have to change the culture in these places where the racial covenants were most active. Minneapolis, segregated, operating on racist practices, but you might find an all are welcome here sign on a few front lawns. That is my summation of why the Minneapolis mayoral election happened the way it did. What's yours?